There are legends told on the road, whispered in dim-lit bars, and debated on internet forums. Most of these legends portray the Bandidos motorcycle club with a dark, almost mythical reputation. They are the outlaws, the one-percenters, the men who live by their own code, separate from society's rules. But what if those stories got it wrong? What if, beneath the leather and the stern faces, there were men bound by a brotherhood so deep, a sense of justice so fierce, that they became the last line of defense for the truly helpless? This is one of those stories, a true account of a moment where the reputation of the Bandidos was overshadowed, not by violence, but by a chilling, immediate, and necessary act of heroism. The day had started like any other. The Texas heat was already a heavy blanket even before noon. For the Bandidos MC, this meant routine, maybe a ride, maybe handling club business, which often involved negotiations and logistics more complex than any corporate boardroom could fathom. The members, known by their road names, Hammer, Ghost, and Reaper among others, were scattered but always connected, their network a digital and physical web that covered the state. They were sitting around at their clubhouse, a solid structure that looked like an impenetrable fortress, when the silence was shattered not by a siren, but by a single, desperate text message received by Hammer, the club's president. Hammer was a man whose presence could stop a clock. His face was usually set in an unreadable mask, a lifetime spent on the road and in tough situations carved into his features. But as he looked down at the screen of his burner phone, his expression shifted. The message wasn't long, but it contained a universe of fear. He blocked the door. It came from a number they knew, a prepaid phone given months earlier to a young mother in a tough spot. She wasn't family, not in the traditional sense, but she was under their protection. A pact made after the club had stepped in on a totally unrelated matter involving a dispute over a car title. The Bandidos often found themselves in these situations, mediating, protecting, or enforcing a certain kind of rough justice where the system failed or simply moved too slowly. The woman, let's call her Sarah, was in a relationship that had turned toxic, controlling, and now dangerous. Hammer knew exactly what "he blocked the door" meant. It wasn't about being locked out. It meant being locked in. It meant a confrontation had escalated past the point of shouting, past the point of simple threats. It meant she and her 2 young children were trapped. The location immediately pinged the club's network, a subtle, pre-agreed-upon feature of the burner phone. It showed a small, unassuming apartment complex about 20 minutes away. In the world of an emergency, 20 minutes is an eternity. Hammer didn't waste a second. He didn't call the police. The reasons were complex. In their experience, the police response could be slow, sometimes hesitant to intervene in domestic disputes without clear evidence of physical harm, and sometimes, frankly, the police presence could escalate things further, putting the victims at greater risk during the confusion. The Bandidos, for all their notoriety, operated with a brutal efficiency that cut through red tape and fear. Hammer stood up. "Get your colors on, now. Sarah's locked in. East Side Complex. Reaper, call ahead. Ghost, your driving point." The command was sharp, clean, and entirely non-negotiable. Within 90 seconds, the clubhouse was empty, replaced by the roar of 6 powerful V-twin engines igniting the air. It wasn't just a group of men going for a ride, it was a focused, high-stakes extraction mission. They moved as a unit, weaving through traffic with a coordinated precision that only years of riding together could produce. The sight of 6 huge men on 6 imposing motorcycles flying down the residential streets was enough to make other drivers instinctively move aside. There was an aura about them, a clear and present danger that demanded respect and space. As they rode, Hammer was running scenarios in his head. The man, a low-level dealer with a known temper, had a history of making bad decisions under pressure. Sarah's safety depended entirely on the speed and force of their arrival. This wasn't about teaching someone a lesson later. It was about saving lives now. When they finally reached the complex, they didn't park. They rolled straight onto the narrow sidewalk, engines revving as they dismounted, their heavy boots hitting the pavement with a loud, unified thud. The sheer volume and speed of their arrival was the first part of their strategy, controlled chaos to shock and freeze the aggressor. The second part was the presence itself. 6 bandidos in their cuts, moving with a silent, purposeful intensity, is a force multiplier that outweighs a simple number. They were not there to negotiate. They were there to enforce the pact. The apartment door was instantly recognizable, a thin wooden barrier that suddenly seemed far too fragile for the terror it was holding back. The sound of muffled shouting could be heard from inside, a man's voice, harsh and frantic, and a child's high-pitched cry. Hammer took the lead. The time for waiting was over. Hammer didn't bother with the handle. He didn't knock, nor did he issue a verbal warning. The situation was past the point of courtesy. With a single devastating kick delivered just below the lock, the thin wooden frame of the apartment door splintered inward with a loud, sickening crack. The sudden, explosive entrance was deliberate, a physical manifestation of the club's authority and determination. The aggressor, whose name was Rick, was frozen mid-sentence, his face contorted in anger before it instantly twisted into raw, unadulterated fear. Rick was a big man, but the sight of Hammer, flanked by Ghost and Reaper, all of them looming in the doorway, their patched vests, a silent, crushing statement, rendered him utterly powerless. This wasn't a neighborhood dispute. This was an unstoppable force walking into his living room. Sarah was huddled in the corner near the kitchen, shielding her 2 young children, a boy and a girl, both small and trembling. The boy was crying silently into his mother's side, while the girl stared wide-eyed at the sudden influx of massive, leather-clad men. For them, the men in the doorway might have looked like villains from a movie, but Sarah knew better. In that terrifying moment, they were the cavalry. The room was tense, thick with the residue of fear and the smell of cheap takeout. A chair was overturned near the center of the room, evidence of the struggle and blockade that Sarah had messaged about. Rick had used his own body and the furniture to prevent them from leaving, a classic move of a man attempting to exert his last ounce of control. "Step away from the door." Hammer's voice was deep and steady, devoid of emotion, which somehow made it more terrifying than a shout. He wasn't asking, he was commanding. Rick took a hesitant step back, his eyes darting frantically between the 6 men who had materialized in his sanctuary. He tried to speak, to bluster, to regain some measure of control. "What the hell? You can't just break into my place. This is private. I'm calling the cops," he stammered, the words hollow and weak against the presence of the bandidos. Ghost, without taking his eyes off Rick, calmly pulled a simple black zip tie from his pocket and placed it conspicuously on the kitchen counter, a clear visual threat. The message was unambiguous. Resistance would not be met with a verbal argument, but with immediate, decisive action. Hammer ignored Rick's desperate claim of authority and focused entirely on Sarah. He knelt down slightly, his heavy frame surprisingly gentle in its movement. "Sarah, are you and the kids hurt?" he asked, his voice now lower, communicating a concern that was starkly contrasted with his harsh demeanor toward Rick. Sarah shook her head, tears streaming down her face as she clutched her children tighter. "No, just scared. He wouldn't let us leave," she whispered, her relief so profound it was almost palpable. "Good," Hammer stated simply. He didn't need to ask for details. The fear in the room was evidence enough. "Reaper, get them out. Take them straight to the designated safe house. No stops, no deviations. You 2 stick with them until morning." Reaper nodded once, a gesture that meant the instruction was already being executed in his mind. Reaper and another member, Tank, moved past Hammer. They didn't rush Sarah. They were calm, efficient, and almost paternal in their approach. Reaper helped Sarah to her feet, while Tank gently scooped up the little boy and carried him out, whispering reassurances that were lost to the sound of the idling motorcycles outside. This wasn't the image of the bandidos most people held, a tender, protective action carried out by men known for their hardness. They were ensuring the physical and psychological safety of the victims before dealing with the aggressor. Rick watched this entire operation unfold, his fear deepening as he realized he was irrelevant in their eyes. His victim was being taken, and he was left alone with the executioners. Once Sarah and the children were clear, the atmosphere in the apartment shifted again, becoming heavy and cold. Hammer turned his full attention back to Rick. The 6 bandidos now filled the small room, their silence more oppressive than any noise. This part wasn't about the law. It was about the code. "You received a warning, Rick," Hammer stated, his eyes fixed on the man. "The pact was simple. Leave her alone. Don't let your issues become her problem, or the children's. You blocked the door. You broke the pact. You created a danger." Rick tried to plead. "It was a mistake, man. Just a fight." Ghost took a slow, deliberate step closer, and Rick instinctively backed up until he hit the wall. "It stops now," Hammer said, his voice lowering to a dangerous rumble. "You will not go near her, you will not call, you will not look for her. If you so much as send a letter, we will find you. This isn't a suggestion. This is the only warning you get. Your door is broken. Consider it a symbol of what happens when you cross the line." The threat was clear, yet unstated, relying entirely on the club's fearsome reputation to do the work of 1,000 lawyers and judges. They weren't there to deliver a verdict, but an absolute and final order of protection. The Bandidos' swift justice was complete within minutes. It was less about physical punishment, though that possibility hung heavy in the air, and more about the psychological deterrent. Rick understood, perhaps for the first time in his life, the real weight of consequences delivered outside the slow, uncertain mechanisms of the state. As Hammer and the others exited the apartment, leaving the splintered door a stark monument to their presence, Rick remained slumped against the wall, utterly defeated. He knew that the threat was not idle. These men didn't rely on paperwork or court dates. They relied on their word and their reputation guaranteed one thing: fail the pact, and the consequences would be severe and final. Outside, the 6 motorcycles roared to life again, the synchronized sound a powerful punctuation mark on the event. They didn't linger to explain anything to neighbors who might have witnessed the dramatic entrance and exit. Their presence was fleeting, a necessary explosion of force and order that vanished as quickly as it appeared. The club's internal network confirmed Reaper's status. Sarah and her children were already miles away, safe and under surveillance at a location known only to a trusted few. The safety of the innocent was always the paramount objective, and the Bandidos' extensive network, often utilized for less savory purposes, proved its surprising efficiency as a rapid response protection unit. Hammer led the group back to the clubhouse. The ride back was quieter, the adrenaline slowly receding, replaced by a deep sense of shared purpose. To the outside world, they had just been 6 intimidating bikers speeding through a neighborhood, but to them, they had upheld a vital part of their private code. This code, sometimes misunderstood, dictates an absolute loyalty to those they deem under their protection, a fierce independence, and a commitment to action when inaction would lead to harm. They had saved Sarah and her kids from a cycle of fear and potential violence, delivering a sense of security that no government agency could provide on such short notice. This narrative often goes untold. The media focuses on the clashes, the rivalries, the violations of law. But in the shadows of those headlines, there are countless stories like Sarah's, stories of people who found protection where they least expected it. The Bandidos MC, founded on the principle of living outside the lines, paradoxically often step in to restore a basic line of safety for the defenseless when the traditional lines of law and order fail. They operate in a morally grey area, yes, but when a mother texts that the door is blocked, their response is unequivocally black and white: immediate intervention. It's a testament to the fact that heroism isn't exclusive to those wearing a uniform. Sometimes it's found under the patched leather of those deemed outlaws. Their code is simple, rigid, and ultimately protective. Family first, then the club, then the mission. In Sarah's case, she had become an extension of their responsibility, a mission they accepted without question. The immediate danger was neutralized, the children were safe, and the aggressor was permanently deterred. The broken door was not an act of vandalism. It was an eviction notice, a declaration that the terror ends now. The cost of replacing a door is nothing compared to the priceless security of a terrified family. They don't seek thanks, recognition, or validation from society. Their reward is the knowledge that they did what was necessary, fast and effectively, when no one else could or would. This is the unwritten law of the Bandidos MC. Sometimes the bad guys are the only ones who can truly play the hero. And for Sarah, the sight of those motorcycles was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, transforming a desperate last resort into a sudden, miraculous rescue. It proves that brotherhood on the road extends beyond the club, sometimes encompassing the entire community that needs their unique, fierce brand of protection.